Good afternoon. Years before the Shoah, my grandmother and her brothers, who had been hiding communist literature in the roof of the synagogue in their small town in Belarus, fled and came to America. So my family's connection to Belarus goes back to the turn of the century. But I know not of anybody who may have lost their lives during the Shoah. I'm sure there were family there. We as Americans know little of the Russian experience and fail at times to realize the devastation that occurred. On one of my military tours, I was sitting in the American meal hall in Tuzla, Bosnia, a place in which never again came to life as Americans, British, French, Swiss, Turkish, Belarus, Russian, Romanian, Polish, German, enemies in the past, and yet altogether preventing another, smaller, but just as nasty genocide from occurring. And I had the opportunity to speak with Russian officers and Belarus officers, not knowing that the war happened on their land. For us here, not experiencing that, is something we don't really take to heart, the devastation and the utter destruction of life and hope. And to understand that in Belarus, to the very end they fought, makes a statement about the sense of who Jews within the Belarus population were and everyone else. A few years before I was in Bosnia, I was assigned to Heidelberg, Germany. Heidelberg is an idyllic little town that was not attacked during World War II because the Americans intended to be there after the war. There were two synagogues in Heidelberg, one in the city right down near the river. And the only discussion that the town folks had was, if they burn the synagogue, would the next door neighbor's house burn also? Do we burn? Do we not burn? Do we burn? Let's burn. And in a small town that's now part of Greater Heidelberg, in Rohrbach, they likewise destroyed the synagogue. In 1994, the city of Heidelberg built a new synagogue. And the community was a mixture of Russians and Germans and DPs. And one of the most powerful moments I have ever seen, I was able to experience. I'm there as an American officer, a Jewish chaplain, a rabbi in uniform. And a brand new Torah was being dedicated. The 613th commandment is to write the Torah. And each of us, starting with the mayor of the city, interestingly, who is not Jewish, helped fill in the last paragraph of this brand new Torah. The sofer there making sure we didn't make any mistakes. Bringing to life a Jewish community that had struggled since World War II. Bringing back a presence in this town in Germany that had been missing since November 9th, 1938. There is hope for the future when people come together, when there is a will to resist power that intends to destroy. You who sit here, survivors, children of survivors, and those of us who embrace you at this time, especially those of us who embrace you at this time, who know not of the experience through which you lived, need to understand that it is the future we build that keeps alive the sacrifice that those who fought and died and suffered. Only when we assure that such things never happen again does something truly messianic occur. My grandmother used to joke about the stone's throw from Minsk or Pinsk, depending on which one she wanted to tell. And my grandmother could tell stories a long time, till she was 99. And while she was never a full citizen, she understood the power of what that Belarus experience in her life was. And every generation of her menfolk went to war. Her husband fought in World War I. Her older son fought in World War II. Her younger son fought in the Korean War. Her son-in-law in Vietnam. I went off to several different lesser engagements. And even her great-grandson was in ROTC. And all of her sons came back. She lived almost the entire 20th century. And in America, she experienced the devastation from afar. It was her country from which she had fled, and yet it was still some of her family. We sit here this day in gorgeous weather. I'm impressed, Inga. I'm in sales, not management. And you guys did really well. I mean, this is a summer day. This is, if we want, Tikvala Achratecha, the verse from Jeremiah. I use two verses that we always want, and in this order. Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And for those in Belarus, it never seemed to be passing, and yet, finally, the war ended. And to rebuild and create a future for themselves and for their descendants. And we who sit here today, able to create a future not just for the Jewish people, but for an entire world to understand that only when one stands in the face of oppression and stands up against it does the evil come to an end. The verse from Jeremiah, who lived through the destruction of the first temple, could say, V'yesh tikva le'achratecha, there is hope for your future. We create that tikva. So when you went back and saw the Belarus remembrance, but it was also not just to look backwards. We are not here just to remember, because that is important, because where we have been must inform us to where we go. In 22 years as a military chaplain, I was in several places in which people murdered other people. To drive through areas of Bosnia to see where there was an attempt by one group to murder another group brought clearly to mind that the lessons of the Shoah have yet to be learned by all. What I found hope for the future in, sitting in that American, well, that's because our food was better. Trust me, you didn't want to go where the Russians were eating. Sitting there with people who in the past, just a few years before, we perceived as our enemies. And now we're unified to protect a group of people who are not of the same religion, not of the same country. We could sit there in our distinctive uniforms, and yet we were one. Provided hope that people of caring goodwill in the world are still willing to stand up for what is right. I met just a handful of Jews in Bosnia. But that wasn't why we were there. Thank God the Jews weren't part of the puzzle. They were left alone. When has that happened to us? But with all of us sitting there, we combined into a force that said might is not right and freed Muslims from the threat of death.